I flew 120 miles with one engine on fire until fuel ran out. And on that morning, it did not feel like a story worth telling. It felt like the final chapter of my life. The date was September 18th, 1944, and the sky over occupied France looked calm from a distance. But I knew better. The war had taught me that quiet skies often hid the deadliest moments. I was a first lieutenant in the United States Army Air Forces, flying a Douglas C-47 Skytrain assigned to the 61st Troop Carrier Group, 9th Air Force, and this mission was part of something much bigger than us. Operation Market Garden, the largest airborne operation of the war. Our job was simple on paper. Deliver supplies to airborne troops fighting to hold bridges deep inside enemy territory, and return to England before German fighters and flak batteries could react. But war never follows paper plans. We lifted off from RAF Greenham Common just after dawn. The runway was wet with morning rain, and the clouds hung low enough to scrape the tops of the trees. My crew went through the motions we had practiced 100 times. Oil pressure, fuel mixture, magnetos, all green. The twin Pratt & Whitney R1830 engines hummed steadily as we rolled forward and lifted into the gray English sky, joining a stream of transports that seemed endless. Hundreds of aircraft stretched from horizon to horizon, each carrying men and supplies that might decide the fate of the operation below. As we crossed the channel, the formation tightened. The radio stayed silent, except for brief commands, and the sound of engines filled the cockpit, a steady mechanical heartbeat that gave a sense of control, even as we knew German gunners were already watching the routes. They had learned our patterns over months of airlift missions. By the time we reached the French coast at around 0900 hours, the first black bursts appeared ahead. Flak, slow, deliberate, and accurate. The Germans waited until we were low and committed before opening fire. The aircraft shuddered as fragments rattled against the fuselage like hail. I remember gripping the yoke tighter, feeling every vibration through the controls, reminding myself to fly steady and not make myself an easier target. Then at 0927 hours, the world exploded on our right side. A violent jolt rocked the aircraft, followed by a sound like tearing metal. The right engine surged once, then coughed. Thick black smoke poured past the cockpit window. Warning lights flashed. Oil pressure dropped to 0, and within seconds, flames erupted along the cowling, bright orange against the dull gray sky. Fear hit hard and fast, but training took over. Mixture cut, prop feathered, fire extinguisher released, but the flames refused to die. Burning oil streamed backward, licking the wing surface and leaving dark scars across the metal. We began to lose altitude, dropping from 2,500 feet toward 1,800, and all the while, flak continued to burst around us, close enough that I could feel the concussion through the airframe. My co-pilot looked at me, waiting for the call. Bailout was an option drilled into us from day one, but below us was occupied France, fields and villages controlled by German forces. Capture was almost guaranteed. And worse, our cargo was medical supplies, badly needed by airborne troops already surrounded and fighting. Turning back meant flying alone, crippled and slow, through hostile airspace. But I knew if we jumped, that aircraft and its cargo would be lost within seconds. I made the decision without ceremony. We were going home on one engine. We turned west, pulling out of formation. Instantly isolated, the remaining engine strained as I pushed it harder than it was ever meant to go. The Skytrain was never designed to fight or flee. It was a workhorse, not a racehorse, and now it was wounded. The burning engine continued to smolder, occasionally flaring when fuel vapors ignited. The cockpit filled with smoke. Even with our oxygen masks on, our eyes burned, instruments flickered, and the fuel gauges began to drop faster than they should have. Damage to the wing or fuel lines was stealing our margin, minute by minute. By 1,000 hours, we were alone over enemy territory, flying low and slow. I kept scanning the sky, expecting German fighters. Every shadow in the clouds felt like a threat. My hands ached from holding the yoke steady. The aircraft wanted to roll toward the dead engine, constantly. And every correction drained more energy, more fuel. Then at 10:45 hours, the threat materialized. Two Focke-Wulf FW-190s appeared behind us, closing fast, their dark shapes unmistakable, even at a distance. Instinct screamed to dive or turn, but we had no speed to trade. I pushed the remaining engine to emergency power, feeling the vibration increase through the controls. Any more stress could rip the wing apart. The fighters drew closer, then unexpectedly broke away, likely assuming the transport was already doomed. I watched them disappear into the clouds, knowing how close we had come to the end. We crossed the channel with little fanfare. The water below looked cold and unforgiving, and by now the fuel gauges were near empty. The left engine began to sputter as contaminated fuel sloshed in damaged tanks. Sweat soaked my gloves, despite the cold air seeping into the cockpit. The fire warning light blinked again, and every sound from the engine made my heart jump. By 11:30 hours, land appeared ahead. England, just a thin gray line on the horizon. But the engine coughed again. RPM dropped. Oil temperature spiked. Every mile felt like a gamble. The crew prepared for ditching, tightening harnesses, reviewing procedures we all knew too well. Then with cruel timing, the fuel pressure dropped to zero. The engine died. Silence replaced the roar. And suddenly, the aircraft was no longer flying. It was falling. A heavy, unforgiving glider descending toward the sea. I fought the controls, scanning desperately for land, knowing we had seconds, not minutes. And that was the moment I realized survival now depended not on engines or fuel, but on every ounce of skill and luck left to us. The aircraft was heavy without power. The controls felt sluggish, and every correction cost altitude. The sea rushed closer, a flat gray mirror waiting to swallow us. And in that moment, all the training, all the checklists, all the hours logged came down to instinct and calm hands. I spotted land to the north, a darker line cutting through the haze. The English coast. Not wide beaches or airfields, just uneven ground and hedgerows. But it was land, and land meant a chance. I adjusted our glide path, carefully watching the airspeed needle, knowing that too slow meant a stall. Too fast meant tearing the airframe apart. We passed over the shoreline at barely 800 feet. The wind shifted suddenly, buffeting the wings. And then, with a sound I will never forget, the burning engine finally gave way. The mounts failed, and the entire engine tore free, spinning away in a trail of smoke and sparks, disappearing into the fields below. The aircraft lurched violently, but the sudden loss of weight gave us a fraction more control. I lowered the flaps by hand, feeling the resistance through the mechanism, bleeding off speed inch by inch. The ground rushed up, green and uneven, dotted with fences and small trees. There was no time to choose a perfect spot, only to avoid the worst obstacles. The landing gear was useless, without power, so I committed to a belly landing, bracing myself and calling out to the crew. The Skytrain hit hard. The impact threw us forward against our harnesses. Metal screamed as the fuselage scraped along the ground. Sparks flashed past the cockpit windows, and the aircraft skidded for what felt like forever, before finally grinding to a halt. Silence followed, complete and unreal, broken only by the ticking of hot metal cooling and our own breathing. For a moment, no one moved. Then the smell of smoke returned, sharp and urgent, and that snapped us back to reality. We scrambled out of the cockpit, dropping to the grass as fire crews from a nearby station arrived almost immediately. They had seen the smoke and flames from miles away. Foam covered the wreckage as the last fires were smothered. I stood there shaking, not from cold, but from the sudden release of everything we had held inside during those long miles. I looked back at the aircraft, the wings scorched, the fuselage torn, and the right engine simply gone, and it struck me how close we had come to disappearing without a trace. Just another missing transport in a long list of losses. Later, the medics checked us over. Cuts, bruises, smoke inhalation, nothing serious. We were alive, and that fact alone felt unreal. The officers asked questions immediately. Time, altitude, headings, engine behavior, fuel state. I answered automatically, still replaying every decision in my head, wondering what I could have done differently. What tiny margin had saved us. Word spread quickly through the group. Crews came by to see the wreck. Some silent, some shaking their heads, not in awe, but in understanding, because they knew it could have been any of them that day. The official report came, later crediting airmanship under fire and decision-making under extreme conditions. They wrote it in clean, measured language, but it could not capture the fear, the noise, the smell, or the weight of command when every choice carries lives with it. I was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, a piece of metal and ribbon pinned to my uniform during a brief ceremony. But what mattered more to me was learning that the supplies we carried had reached the airborne troops, the next day transferred from another aircraft and used to treat wounded men who otherwise might not have survived. Operation Market Garden would not end as planned. The bridges would not all be held, and the casualty lists would grow long. Over 17,000 Allied soldiers killed, wounded, or captured. Transports lost, crews missing, gliders smashed into fields and forests. But in the middle of that cost, there were moments like ours, small victories of survival that never made headlines, yet kept the war moving forward. Years later, people would ask me how I did it, how I flew 120 miles with an engine on fire until fuel ran out. And I never had a simple answer. I did it because there was no other acceptable choice. Because men on the ground were counting on us. Because training and discipline leave little room for panic when seconds matter. Because sometimes survival is not about heroism, but about refusing to give in when the situation tells you that you are already dead. I remember the sound of that last engine going silent, the sudden stillness, and the rend clarity that followed when fear burned away and only focus remained. That moment stayed with me long after the war, long after the aircraft were scrapped, and the airfields returned to grass. It reminded me that the Second World War was not only decided by grand strategies and famous battles, but by ordinary crews facing impossible situations and choosing to keep going anyway. After the war ended and the noise faded, the memory of that flight stayed sharper than any medal or citation. Time has a way of softening most things, but not that morning. Every detail remained clear. The color of the smoke, the way the controls felt heavy in my hands, the moment the engine tore free, and the sudden, strange quiet that followed. People imagine courage as something loud and dramatic, but for me, it was quiet. It was the decision made without words, when turning back or giving up was not an option. The war moved fast in those final months. New missions, new faces, new losses, but I noticed something had changed in me. I trusted training more than luck, and I trusted calm more than fear, because I had seen what panic could do and what discipline could overcome. When I spoke with younger pilots, I never told the story as a boast. I told it as a lesson. Aircraft fail, plans collapse, and the enemy always gets a vote. But if you keep thinking, if you keep flying the aircraft, you still have, instead of the one you wish you had, you might just find a way through market. Garden became a case study later. A bold plan that fell short. Historians would debate the decisions for decades. The timing, the intelligence, the optimism. But from the cockpit perspective, it was simpler. Bridges needed to be held, supplies needed to arrive, and every flight carried the weight of men on the ground, counting minutes until relief. The C-47 never got the attention given to fighters or bombers. Yet it carried the war on its wings. Paratroopers, fuel, ammunition, wounded men, and hope flew low and slow into Flak corridors because that was what the mission demanded, and crews accepted the risk without complaint because someone had to do it. When I visited reunions years later, other pilots shared similar stories. Engines shot out, wings torn, fuel leaking away, and somehow making it back, or sometimes not making it at all. We remembered the names of those who did not return more easily than our own achievements, because loss leaves a deeper mark. I thought often about how thin the line was between survival and disappearance, how a few feet of altitude, a few gallons of fuel, or a single decision could decide everything. The aircraft I flew that day never flew again. It was salvaged and broken down, its aluminum reused for other purposes, perhaps turned into cookware or parts for new machines. But in my mind, it remained frozen in that final glide toward the English coast, scarred, battered, and stubbornly alive. Younger generations ask what it felt like to know you might not make it home, and the facts unraveling. Honest answer is that you do not think in those terms, not in the moment. The mind narrows to tasks, airspeed, angle, attitude, wind. You do not imagine funerals or headlines. You imagine fields and coastlines and runways. You imagine the next minute, not the end. And that focus becomes a kind of shield. After the war, I returned to civilian flying, and later to teaching others to fly. Whenever an engine sputtered or an instrument flickered, I watched reactions carefully. Fear is natural, but control is learned. And I tried to pass on that lesson, not with stories of heroism, but with emphasis on preparation. because preparation buys you time, and time buys you choices. History remembers the Second World War through its great turning points: Normandy, Stalingrad, Midway. But woven through those moments are thousands of flights like mine, mostly unrecorded, where ordinary crews faced extraordinary danger and survived, not because they were fearless, but because they refused to stop thinking when everything went wrong. I never considered myself a hero. The men who jumped into occupied territory or held bridges against armor deserved that word far more. If anything, I was a steward of responsibility, carrying supplies entrusted to me, and crewmen who trusted my hands on the controls. When people hear the title, How I Flew 120 Miles with One Engine on Fire Until Fuel Ran Out, they expect a dramatic secret, a trick, or a miracle. But the truth is less dramatic and more human. It was a chain of decisions, each one small, each one necessary. Feather the prop, hold heading, manage speed, trust your training, trust your crew, and do not give up when the aircraft tells you it is dying, because sometimes it will hold together just long enough. The world today moves faster and higher than it did in 1944. Computers correct mistakes. Engines rarely fail the same way. But the core lesson remains. Machines can break, plans can fail, and in those moments, character matters more than technology. I look back now, not with pride, but with gratitude. Gratitude for the crew who stayed calm. Gratitude for the instructors who drilled procedures into muscle memory. Gratitude for the luck that gave us a coastline instead of open sea. And gratitude that the story ended with us walking away instead of becoming a line in a report. That flight did not change the outcome of the war, but it changed me. It taught me that survival is often quiet, that courage is often practiced long before it is needed. And that history is built not only by famous names, but by countless individuals who simply refused to stop when everything told them they should. And if there is any legacy worth carrying forward, it is that understanding that even in the darkest moments, when the engine is on fire and the fuel is gone, there may still be a way home if you keep flying the aircraft you have and hold steady until the ground rises to meet you.